All right, so I'm just starting the recording, and the other thing I want to let you guys know, for those of you that are here in person, I am also actively running that purple link right at the top of our homepage. It says online meeting room. You guys, I mean, if you're in the classroom, you really don't have to go in there, but if maybe you're in the situation where some people are today, depending on where you live, the snow is like not that bad or horrendous. Like where I live, it's really, really bad. And when I left, it was still snowing at the rate of like an inch an hour. So it should be interesting when I get home and try to pull in the driveway. But if you ever get into that situation where you're stuck at home, you're sick, whatever the case may be, your car broke down, you can always let me know in advance and I can start that meeting room. In fact, it's active and running right now. And what I'm doing is I'm sharing whatever's on my screen and I'm sharing my voice. If you connect up from home, you can use a camera and microphone if you want. Chances are I won't let you turn them on during the session, but you can. But there's also a chat room and all these little other cool little features. If you guys have ever used like FaceTime or Google Hangouts or anything like that, it's basically that type of tool. In fact, it uses the same plugin that Google Hangouts uses. So if you've used that, your browser's all set to go. Now, in a class like this, you know, I don't typically use this very often, but for my online web students, where most of the classes I teach are a hybrid of online and face-to-face, I have some students that are there every single class in that environment. There's some really kind of neat features in there if you actually, you know, open up that link and jump in. Well, the one is you can get this infinity mirror effect if you're sharing your screen, so you see yourself, seeing yourself, you know, et cetera. But kind of the advantage here is that there's all these cool little tools in there, and one of the cooler ones that I didn't know initially is over on this little sidebar. They have like if you're at home watching this, you can record it too if you want, and it saves within Blackboard for yourself. Yeah, I think it's kind of neat. Makes me a little nervous though about what I say sometimes, you know, because in this politically correct world that we live in. But really feel free if you want to use that tool. I usually don't use that recording tool because I don't like to nestle the recordings necessarily inside of Blackboard. There's chat windows here off to the side, this little side panel. And every once in a while you can see there's nobody else really logged in right now. Well, actually that's not true. Got one other person. Hi. Well, Jordan's out there. Isn't that wonderful? And it looks like he's coming in on his mobile phone too, which is fine. It might be a little hard to see my screen at times, but at least he can kind of hear what's going on and kind of feels part of the community. If he wants, he can actually, well, it looks like we had one person in and out. Okay. But if you want, you can turn on your mic and your camera and you can talk to us from afar. The only thing that I caution you, though, is that if I'm mid-lecture, and I'm not expecting you to come in this way, it's a little weird. The other thing that happens is if you do this remotely, headsets or earbuds or something like that are recommended because you can get like echo loops happening. Although most of them, you know, you can mute the mic and unmute it when you need to talk. It's not really that big a deal. The way I set up my meeting rooms, you also have the capability to share your screen just the way that I do by coming to this third side panel item on the bottom. And the other really kind of neat thing is this meeting room is always active within the course shell, and you can make little subgroups too. So like if you were working on like a team project with somebody, provided your instructor has turned it on, you can actually go in there and form your own little meeting room on your own as a side and work in there. You know, so like if you do group work, and believe it or not, you know, with some of our online groups, we do project work and they have to work together. It's not even an option, and that's kind of one of the only mechanisms they have. For as weird as this technology is, and it's really uncomfortable, especially when you do something like this and you turn the camera on, you know, and you're, well, thank goodness that it's probably picking up my leap motion thing. But if you turn the camera on and you have to look at yourself talk, it really throws you off. Do you know why? Because when we look at like ourselves, you know, usually we look in a mirror, right? And in a mirror, you get a reversed image of yourself, and that's what you're used to seeing. You flip the camera on, and all of a sudden you think that what you're seeing is backwards. It's like, my hair's like, wait, I thought I did my hair this way, you know? And it really, for whatever reason, it just messes you up. So some of the software people that are running these programs now have the little switches for their cameras where you can actually flip, you know? to make you feel comfortable looking at yourself. And I'll tell you what, I'm still not comfortable looking at myself, so I try not to put my face up on the screen. But in the professional IT world, folks, meetings are done like this all the time. And it's not just even IT, it's just like all across enterprise. Because why should, like, if we had a meeting today and it was like the only thing I had to do, and some days I have days like that, why should I drive all the way from Milwaukee in this kind of weather just to come to a meeting when I can just hop up in a thing like this? We can still talk, we can still see each other, we can still share documents, we can get work done. And so this is kind of the way of the modern world. So embrace it, because when you guys go out into the workplace, that's the way it's going to be. And, you know, for a lot of you younger people, you know, I always make myself sound old like that because I guess I am, as my kids often remind me. You know, you guys are used to it. I mean, how many of you just like video, just call your friends, right? Yeah. And don't even bat an eye at it. I try doing that with my wife. She'll have no part of it. You know, she's like, just call me, would ya? You know, but I think it's kind of fun. So, all right, so that's the technology. If you're ever stuck at home, though, just keep in mind, just let me know, and I can flip this on, and you're still participating as far as I'm concerned. So whoever's in that room right now, well, Jordan, thank you for joining us. I consider him here. You know, it's not that I really count attendance. I don't know if you guys catch that. And some teachers will do this. They'll make you even like sign a sheet. We're not really allowed to grade you guys on attendance. I can grade you on participation, though, right? It's kind of hard to participate if you're not there. So, but it is also possible to participate if you're not there, frankly. You know, an email, a phone call, or, you know, a visit, you know, online chat, it all works. All right, so because of the snow this morning, it did throw me off. And, you know, I spent a good part of the morning making sure everybody was shoveled out at home. Come in, school's canceled, kids didn't have to go. Yeah, so they were like, great, good night, Dad, back to bed. And then my wife had to go into work too, so I had her car all cleaned off, you know, the plow stuff moved away from the car. And guess what? She didn't have to go in either. Right, so I could have saved like a whole bunch of shoveling for when I got home, but okay, so I was a good Samaritan and got it done. And then I got payback for it because when I was leaving, I live at the bottom of a hill, and we have to go up this pretty steep incline to get to the main street. And I didn't even like make the turn, and my neighbors were like, "Hey, wait!" And I'm like, "What?" And like, "We'll push you. You're gonna need it. Trust me. We'll push you about halfway up, and then you'll make it." And they did. So otherwise, I may not have been here. So kind of weird. The car I'm driving isn't really meant for snow. All I can say is if you can afford it, get an all-wheel drive vehicle. Folks, they really do make a difference, and have good tires. All right, so because of all that, I really didn't get a lot of stuff posted in Unit 5. I do have the stuff outlined as to what I want to assign. So right now I have in there basically the PowerPoint and you know, what the topics are, which is Chapter 5. Now, the fascinating thing about this chapter, folks, is, you know, data and knowledge management. And it's something that, you know, when you get into IT, especially if you get into like the hardware side of things, you tend not to think about a lot. But this is like the biggest growth area of IT right now, is this data part, right? So the interesting thing is that there's such a demand for it that Gateway is offering actually 2 new programs, and I think I talked about that last week. And one of them is one that I'm spearheading, which is IT Data Analytics Specialist is what it's called. And that's going to start in the fall. So if you guys are looking for extra classes to take or considering maybe switching degrees, that might be one you want to consider. It's going to be offered in its entirety at the IMET Center, which is our engineering wing, which is out on Highway 20, just south of the movie theaters. It's down there by Andes Corporation and Real School and all that. Basically right under the Sturtevant Water Tower is where it is. So that's just something kind of interesting to know. So this topic is kind of dear to me right now because I've been putting a lot of time and research and stuff into it. One of the reasons we're developing that degree is because of Foxconn moving into the area, saying that they need, on average, at least 20 data specialists a year for the next 5 years. That's like 100 of them, right? I don't know what they're paying, but they're on a technician level, so it's probably, probably 50, 60, 70 to start, and probably goes up from there. But that's a big growth area. So we will lecture on some of the topics in here, so you guys get an overview of it. But I do want to start with the articles. Normally I'd have a Kahoot ready for you, but again, I'm blaming the weather. But we don't want Eric to bow out every week, right? All right, folks. I'm going to jump over to the discussion board, and I think what we'll do is everybody in here, does everybody in here have something posted? Yes, no, maybe. Can I give you guys a hint? You can probably do it really fast. And if it's only like 10 or 15 minutes late, I probably won't mark you late. Just FYI. I'm not like one of those kind of teachers. So the topic is data and knowledge management. All right? So you could just like take a moment and do a really quick search online and see what relates to that. There's so many things that fit into this category, it's kind of scary.
What was it again?
Data and knowledge management. So it could be like data warehousing, data mining, personal information. There's knowledge management systems. You just look up data analytics for that matter, and look at the explosive growth that's happening in this field right now. Let me start, before we go into the articles, by telling you guys this. I went to this thing, conference thing, where they were talking about this topic. And the keynote speaker at the thing got up and said that, so this is in the summer, that in the last 18 months, so maybe I want to say last 2 years, whatever, we have generated more data than all the previous years in human history combined in that last 18 months prior to his speech, according to his calculations. That's kind of mind-boggling, right? Then I ask myself, what does that data contain? All the stuff you like on Facebook, your Instagram posts maybe, right? But it's a whole lot more, because everything's coming up online now that didn't used to be online. People are putting smart devices in their homes, in their cars, our phones, our we talked about all the devices we have, and all of them generate data, and every time you interact, that data is somehow stored. Every time you download a free app or use that free email account, you are paying a price, right? We talked about that. And what is the price? In exchange for your information. So why do they care about your information? That's the biggest one right there, because they can advertise to you, and if they can advertise to you, hopefully, from the seller's perspective, it's like, well, if we know that you're interested in Raspberry Pis, well, we're going to put some ads up for Raspberry Pis because you're probably going to buy one, right? I'm not going to put up, a thing for lingerie for Eric because he probably, well, who knows, right? But but who knows? I mean, truly, and that's kind of like the mindset of the data collectors. Now, there are big issues, and we talked about this last time because there's, goes hand in hand with the privacy issue, that some of the big companies, especially in the European markets and now starting in California, a lot of them are getting restricted as to how they can use the information. And further, they have to start letting people know that they're collecting the information. And then a lot of times when you go to these websites, you might get this thing that says at the bottom, this site gives you cookies and does all this stuff. Click here to accept, or click here to manage your choices. And if you go into manage your choices, usually you get out of there really quick. And if you're like me, and there's a gazillion questions to answer and manage, I'm like, you know what? I don't need this website that bad. That's me, right? When some people are like, no, I really want to see what happened on the Grammys. Or, aliens ate my baby, or whatever, article you're reading. So take it with a grain of salt. In Europe, these laws have been pretty stringent for a while. So because they have to develop for that environment, they figured, a lot of companies figured, well, we may as well make it for everybody, right? I would encourage you guys, kind of going back to last week's topic, so if you are a social media user and you use like Facebook or something, and you're pretty active on it, you really might want to go check into like what data they're keeping on you. you might be a little shocked. You might be a little bit shocked. In fact, here's what I'm going to do. This is kind of my sneaky way to check Facebook while I'm teaching. Right? I'm going to log into my account, right? And I'm not really even looking at my notifications, but what I am looking at is what ads are going to come up on my screen. Now, isn't this funny? Milwaukee needs more coders.
I get that one all the time.
Yeah, good. And it's true. There's more positions, but I always look at those ads, and usually, all right, there's an ad for a TV show. And it happens to be I actually watched that one. We were watching it last night in bed.
It knows.
And I find it interesting as I scroll down and start looking at things, what pops up on your feed and why. Do you think the stuff you see on your Facebook feed is by accident?
No, well, Facebook uses your microphone, and hears you talk about everything.
Yes.
Really?
Uninstall that. If you're paranoid about that stuff, uninstall that app. They're listening, folks.
Yeah. It like takes keywords.
What do you say?
Kind of what my article was about.
All right. Well, let's segue then. That's perfect, Eric.
Yeah.
Let me, and you're Eric with an E. Because we have Eric with an A, right? So, and do you say it, Eric? All right, go for it, Eric.
So essentially, over in Germany, long story short, they're trying to push that before you use Facebook, that you give their consent, that you know that they're using your data or collecting it or what have you. The other thing they're pushing for is not only to give consent, but if you decline it, that they still have to provide the service to you. Because if you do not give your consent originally with Facebook, you cannot use it at all. So they're kind of like pushing, they're trying
Right.
to get Facebook to come up with something within 12 months to change how that's presented, I guess. So.
And and that really kind of goes in line with one of my pet peeves in perpetuity with IT, and that is software licenses, right? So you go out to a store, and I'm thinking more like the old scenario, because now we download everything, right? But in the old days, you'd walk into the store, and if you wanted to like buy, let's say Microsoft Office or something, right? You buy it, you spent like whatever you spent on it, you got the disk, you put it in your machine, and then all of a sudden you got to agree to all this like terms and conditions, and it's like, you already got my money.
Yeah, you have to agree to it before you can.
Yeah, before you can even use the thing you already paid for, you got to agree to their terms.
Could be like, hey, let us use your name in advertising. And it's like, okay, now I can't use it because they can use my data.
And how many people do you think actually read those
Nobody-
license agreements?
Nobody does.
Yeah, very few
Everybody
people.
should, but nobody does.
Right. You would be surprised if you read the terminology, especially, they're not so bad for desktop apps, but if you get like mobile apps that are free, like pick a game. I have a great example. I downloaded this TV remote control for my phone, right? Because of course, whenever you're at home, what happens to the TV remote? Who the hell knows? The dog ate it, right? It's in the couch. It's under whatever. So I figured, I know there's apps out there, so I find one, and I'm like, yep, controls a Samsung TV. So I load it all up. Then all of a sudden, I got like these different lock screens on my phone, and ads are popping up, and then I started reading their license agreement, and I'm like, oh my God, and I was like, uninstall, worse than Facebook, So for the convenience of like not having to stand up and like change the volume of the TV, they like kind of rule your life. Now I wonder what would happen if I actually paid for the software. Would all that stuff go away?
Probably not.
Maybe not. That's the scary part.
I remember vaguely that there was like an app or something that, I don't know what it was, but it was kind of big back then. They agreed to like own your soul or something like that. They put it in as a joke just to see how many people would like not
Read it.
actually.
Next thing you know, you're in the afterlife and you're in trouble, right?
Yeah. Something weird like that, and they revealed it, a lot of people were shocked, like, hey, you didn't read it, so we own you now, so.
Wow.
I mean, it's
It's
fun,
pretty heavy,
but it's,
know.
especially if you're like,
yeah.
if you're really kind of
it's
vested
funny.
in believing in, somebody can like own your soul through an app or
Yeah, I
something.
can't remember exactly what it was, but they just flat out said like, yeah, we own you now, so
Yeah.
you agree to the terms and conditions, so.
Yeah, that's the funniest thing because there's that movement that they're trying to make for everybody that has some sort of data agreement or online agreement where, a lot of us don't really read through it because it's so long. We just
Right.
sit there and
Well,
agree
absolutely not.
or accept. Yeah, there's supposed to be that law where they're supposed to shorten it and go straight to the point
Yeah.
so they won't hide all that extra information.
Like it has to be upfront and clear now,
Yeah.
like they cannot make it like, words that
Dilute
most
it.
people won't understand, they have to.
Well,
make
right,
it
because a lot of those things are written by who? By lawyers, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with legalese or like how they like phrase things or, you could get yourself in trouble. I think it's interesting though, because if you think about like when you install a mobile app, usually you get a screen, right? If you guys go ahead and install Facebook, Facebook's like one of the ones that floors me the most though, because they list all the permissions you give them. And if you really read those list of permissions, it is kind of astounding. Now, the fact that, this article that you brought up, Eric, talks about the fact that you can decline, but then you can't use their service. That's a pretty major thing, right? Because you are using a service that's free, so there's kind of a trade-off, right? The fact that you're even using social media to begin with means that people are looking at your stuff somehow.
And then they have to make money. And that's where the sponsorships come in. We got all this information, so-and-so likes.
I think
All right, so we're going to start talking about Chapter 5. I am running the recording right now, just so you guys are aware. And I'm going to just kind of scroll back here. I don't want to really be in presentation mode, and I hope you guys don't mind. I like this mode a little bit better. But I'm starting out on slide number 6, first content slide, I suppose, or 7. But I kind of said this before, right? I went to that conference, and there was a speaker, and the guy said, in the 18 months prior to him giving his speech, there was more data generated by humans than in all of human history combined up until that point. Right? And what's in that data? Like, or really inane things like that. But no, really though, there's so much data being generated, it's kind of scary. If you think about the types of information, and what really is data? And that's really kind of a really key concept. They touched upon it really briefly in the first chapter. Data is basically raw information. So if you let's say, if I went around and I figured out what your birth date is, what your weight is, real interesting little tidbits of information about you, right? And I just wrote it down on a list. If I just took that information and didn't put your name next to it, is it even information? So there's a difference, and this is a really kind of a key thing in IT, is understanding that there's a difference between information and data. Data is just raw information. Like if you were just to look at output of numbers and letters or even worse, binary information that you can't really decipher, it has zero meaning until, let's say I take those numbers and say, aha, that 22, that's James' IQ. No, I'm kidding, James, I'm kidding. Not his age, but his IQ, right? But as soon as you can attribute it to an entity, then it becomes information. And really, therein kind of lies the crux of all these information systems that we talk about, because you get raw data all the time. And what is it that we do with that data? All right, from the perspective of an organization, data drives organizations, folks, right? So I'll just give you kind of a what-if scenario. If I ran a business, and and the thing is, I did. I ran a number of businesses in my lifetime, and one of them was a retail operation, right? And when you start to run a retail operation, you do things kind of like in a cycle, right? It's like, the holidays are coming up, so, or let's say, like, if I was like a place that sold like de-icing salt, right? Because I was looking for a bag yesterday, and I stopped at Pick and Save, and guess what? Sold out. Went to the hardware store, sold out. Went to the gas station, sold out. Ended up finding it at Woodman's. They had like a huge pile of it, and really cheap too, so I was happy, right? And it wasn't even for me, it was for my mom. But the people that order that product at Woodman's must be smarter than the people at Pick and Save. Okay, so this is kind of my thinking, right? They must take a look at the numbers of how much they sold, and Woodman's maybe has the financial might to say, you know what, give us 100 pallets of salt. And Pick and Save might say, send me 2. If it sells, great. If not, I don't want to sit on it till next year, where Woodman's might be able to sit on it. So they probably just look at sales data, and what do they use that data for? To make better buying decisions. So maybe they're not even making any money on the salt. But you know what? They got me in the door, and then I'm like, honey, do we need milk? Yes. Okay, get some milk and eggs and bread and, all the staples that you normally get. Ice cream, you gotta have some ice cream. And so what ends up happening is they get you in the door and you're spending money on something else. So there's kind of like this, knowledge is power when it comes to running an organization, including here at Gateway, right? So even here at Gateway, we look at numbers, right? Like every year we're looking at how many people enrolled for classes compared to the previous year. Are numbers up? Are numbers down? And in higher education in general, it seems like the numbers are kind of going down. A lot of schools are struggling. But the truth is, there's more schools to go to. And a lot of people are getting hired. So when the economy is good and people are getting jobs, people don't go to school. As soon as the economy tanks, everybody's running to school to get retrained because there's no jobs to find, and at least then you can get like student loans or whatever and make your life work. But knowledge is power, and it comes from data. The problem is, how do we store the data, right? Just put it all on my flash drive. Well, you know what? You can fit a lot on a flash drive these days, right? And if you guys have them, like what's the typical size for a flash drive these days?
That's 16. Usually like 16.
8, 16 gig, 32 gig, 64 gig.
Average,
Yeah.
I'm thinking they can go up to like 120 or something. Probably bigger than that.
Yeah, they actually can go significantly bigger than that, to like insane degree. When you sit and you look at, like the kind of storage we even have in our phones, right? I don't know what kind of phones you guys have or what kind of storage you have, and if you're like me, of course, because I'm an IT geek, and I carry around extra storage, and of course I can't open this thing right now. I got this little thing that holds an SD adapter, right? So I went and, my phone came with like 64 gigs on board, and there's a little slot you can put in more. Okay, and this little tiny one I have here, this is 8 gigs of storage, right? It's a micro SD card. I bought one that's 128 gigs for my phone because it was so damn cheap. I forget what I paid for it. And, and I'm like, I'll never fill that up. Get a good 10, 20 movies on there, all of a sudden it's filling up pretty fast, But the fact that you can put so much information in such a small space, and when you start to really chronicle what can fit on there, this is where it gets mind-boggling, because in the old days of data, we used to think of data in terms of just text, right? And even on an 8 gig micro SD card, I could probably store tens of thousands of books of text on that card, right? An 8 gig card like this, I'm trying to think of like how big my music collection is. My music collection is probably like 160 gig right now, which is pretty big, right?
I remember hearing something about how they could fit the entire Library of Congress in 1 terabyte or something like that.
That's right, if it was all text,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
So everything in the Library of Congress, if it was all text, could fit on a 1 terabyte thing. And you know what? They do make, I don't know if they make micro SDs that are, you'd have to look into it. But they have some pretty small form factors where you can get ridiculous amounts of data. That's mind-boggling to me. You guys want to take a really quick field trip?
Yeah.
All right, follow me. Yeah, we're walking across the hall. It's not that exciting.
He's like,
And, you know, and next week, we'll probably do the same thing again. All right. We're gonna go off to the right. We're gonna go into room T301.
Oh, I was in here. That's my class.
Yeah, you guys can go in there. That's the hardware room, but that's not actually our ultimate destination. And I will go through stuff. All right, so going back to this data thing, right? So when we talk about internal sources, right? So for us here, if like you're in my SharePoint program or a web program, and you're connecting up to data that we're using in class or our databases, they're sitting right across the hall. So I always tell people, yeah, we can just walk right over to the machine. And yes, I actually have used my flash drive to hack my own server. Did I tell you how like I forgot the password over the summer when I actually had to do that once. And the fascinating thing is that for most organizations now, they do not house their own data. Gateway is actually kind of an exception because we do have our own little data center down at the bioscience building in Kenosha. So if you ever are on campus there, where they have their nursing program, they have a room in there that's maybe a little bit bigger than this, that is literally filled floor to ceiling with servers of all sorts. If you guys are in the software program and work with the IBM I, that's where that machine is located. And that IBM I is like 3 rack spaces maybe, super powerful mid-range computer, and that's just one machine in a rack. So where's your data? Sometimes you don't even know. But for enterprise these days, the move is you don't keep your own equipment. That equipment is in the data center somewhere that you can remote control as if it was in the next room, but it makes sense to put it somewhere safe so that you don't lose anything. And if you really set it up correctly, that information replicates from data center to data center. And the logic is you knock out one, the data's still there. You lose nothing. Why? Because we are so reliant on data now. Our whole economy would shut down if our servers shut down.
Yeah.
Why? Where's your money when you get paid? It's just numbers in an electronic file, folks. So what happens if all the banks lose power and all their data centers go down? Where is your money? You can't like walk in there and say, hey, I got like $1,000 in my account. It's like, prove it.
I got this gold Google.
See, in the old days, we used to get passbooks, right? And you used to put money in the bank, and the lady would take the thing from you and put it in her typewriter and type, you got $100 in your account.
Yeah.
You don't got that anymore. So what happens?
Mr. Robot begins.
Yes, Mr. Robot begins. The cynicism comes out. All right, so a real big issue these days is for a lot of organizations, if they did not have people that were responsible for controlling their data, now they're starting to hire people, which is why we're developing this new degree, that oversee their data. I'm not necessarily even talking about, being a database administrator. I'm just talking about people who like conceptually manage it. Like who's responsible for the stuff in there? Did you ever hear about like the Freedom of Information Act? So it's FOIA, right? You see that acronym? Where the U.S. government, if a file is not top secret, you can petition the courts to look at any of their records, right? Hypothetically, right? Except the UFO files. But that is a form of data governance, and really, Gateway has the same policies in place. Like if you wanted to find out like all your records that Gateway has, you can walk. There's probably some office you can walk into, and they can probably query every database and every file and every record, and they can pull it out and show it to you. And sometimes people do that for whatever reasons. I really don't know the reasons, but it's a thing. All right, let's talk about databases, and really kind of the heart of data. Is what we talked about before. Data is raw information, and it really becomes information once we organize it. The number one way for us to organize data is what we call a database. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you just kind of like a brief little overview of databases. Not that you guys are going to become database experts or anything like that from like a 5-minute lecture from me, but is something that you guys should be aware of in terms of how important it is to society in general, because so many of the things that we do online, every time you're online, And what's the first thing you do? You go to Google, you type something in, you hit the button, it brings back results, you click the link. Where the heck does that come from? Some giant database somewhere, right? So Google has software that goes out there and is constantly crawling the web. That's what they call it. And it basically goes to every website and follows every link and searches what we call the surface web. That's the part of the internet that we can actually search. And then there's the other part of the internet. You know what that part's called?
Deep web?
The deep web, right? And they kind of equate the deep web to like an iceberg in the water, right? You see the tip of the iceberg and like 95% of it's below the water, right? So think about it, it makes a lot of sense.
Close those doors?
Yeah, if you could close them, I'd appreciate it.
Close them.
If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because think about like when you go to Gateway's website, you can look at the website, whatever, but then you got classes and you log into Blackboard. Now you can't see what's in Blackboard unless you're registered for the class and logged in, right? And you're an active student, and then you can see all the stuff inside of Blackboard for your class. So part of the deep web doesn't mean it's like the dark web, that's a different entity, but it's, you know, so when we say Google searches the internet and builds that database, it searches what we call the surface web, the part that is publicly accessible, the part that, you know, the parts that we share on Facebook or put in our web pages for all to see. Now, that data is collected. So I told you, for example, you know, if I get like raw information, and I'm going to pick on James.
Oh, man.
You talk a lot, so I may as well pick on you, right? So let's just say I'm extrapolating your age. You're like 23, right?
Yes.
Okay. Right? And his address, here's his address, folks, 123 Elm Street. That's for real. Right? And here's his email address, so he's got like a whatever at Yahoo or whatever. .com. Just imagine that I'm actually writing this right. And take any other piece of information that he might have about himself. If I just write it on the board, it means nothing. You look at that and you go, oh, right? If I all of a sudden say James in there and put his last name and his middle name, his date of birth, social security number, and then I'm putting it, notice how I'm putting it in a row, right? It's a row of related information. All of this information relates to one entity who is James. And it gives it meaning. And usually when we do this, we do it in kind of like the form of like a spreadsheet, right? Rows and columns of related information. So obviously this is name, you know, age, you know, address, etc. And so if I went ahead and added another record, like I might add Eric, right? And Eric, like what, you're 55? 15, 18, 20.
21.
21, all right, pretty good. All right, and put all his information here. Now I have a record of information on Eric, right? Now what happens is we end up building what we call a flat file, which is the fundamental structure of text files, database tables, spreadsheets, etc. And people refer to these by different names. In a database, we call this a table. You can also call it a flat file. It really is nothing but text separated into categories. And we have information that goes in that fits into certain constructs. So for example, in the age field, only numbers can go in, right? I can't put like the letter Z in there, it makes no sense. In the name field, only letters can go in. Unless you're Prince and you have that symbol.
Yeah.
Right? Or the artist formerly known as Prince. That joke's no longer funny. It was funny 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Kids don't even know what I'm talking about. Who's Prince? So that's a flat file. Now, where it becomes a database is when you come here and you register for classes. They start to gather this information and they put it into a database, right? You come in, you sign up, they take that information, and they start to split the information into different categories. So one will be, for example, your personal information file. Like stuff like your social security number, which really nobody should see. And here's kind of like how times have changed. When I went to school, my student ID was my social security number. They'd print it right on my report card. It'd be on the envelope that they would send me in the mail. And it used to be you could take those social security numbers and look them up on the IRS website and see what everybody made. They locked that down pretty fast. Like 6 months after they had it available. All right, so, but here's what happens. James signs up for classes, right, this semester. Somewhere in a separate file, another table of information, I really want to disconnect these lines here. They'll put in his student ID, so we'll just call it SID, and it's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's his ID. Except I wrote 1, 2, 4, 3.
Yeah, 1, 2, 4, 3.
Right? They don't need to put his name in here, right? Because over at this table, they have an ID column. And then over here, they put in like a course number, right? And this one's 107-011-3RMA, something like that,
Yeah,
right? You know what, that's probably all that's in that table. And this is our registration table. And what happens is they link the data, they take this piece of information, and they link it back to this one. And that link is called a relationship. So this information is related to this information. And then if you start to think about all the different systems we have here at Gateway, we'll have one for like financial aid, for registration, for grading, for paying your bill, personal information, and God knows what else. You know, what you're doing on your Facebook page, maybe. And what happens is all the tables are somehow related, and those relationships form what we call a relational database. And that's what that next section is about. Relational database structures are what drive most of the applications that we use, even on your phone, the websites we visit, the computers that we run. It's astounding, actually, how much is stored on databases. And if you're really looking for a good career path, that makes a lot of money. And I had somebody a number of years ago tell me this. The guy's like, yeah, I went and got myself Oracle certified as a DBA. He goes, one thing I can tell you is if you know databases, you'll never have a problem eating because you're always in demand. And you can make a lot of money running databases. So if you guys ever want to go to higher level work, that's one of those career paths where it's not unusual to get up to $250,000 a year in pay. Believe it or not. You guys, so James is like, yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. A little bit.
But it does take a lot of diligence, and a lot of people do not have the mind for this, right? But some people do. In our web and software programs, we teach relational databases. So if you're a software person, you'll learn how to work with DB2. And if you're a web person, you'll learn SQL Server and MySQL. And they all use this shared language called SQL, Structured Query Language. And you'll hear people either say SQL or SQL. They're kind of synonymous. There's a whole fight about how it should be said. But the truth is that that's a separate language that is basically in the form of what we call a query. And that sounds kind of queer, right? What's a query? James, I'm going to query you about what you did last night. What am I really saying?
Question?
Yeah, question, right? So query is really, and it's kind of related to the word question, is a way that we ask for information from a database. When you guys sit down at Google and you type in a search, really what you're doing is a database query. You're querying Google's database about whatever it is you're looking up. Like, where's the cheap place to get a hamburger around here? Right? And so some of the query information is something that you type, and some of it is also probably based upon the other information they've collected upon you, right? So they probably, if I typed in hamburger right now, I bet you Kewpies would be right at the top of the list, right? Because it's right up the street.
Yeah, because of location.
right? I hope they wouldn't bring up like, Cops frozen custard in Milwaukee. Well, they might. But that's a query. So that's kind of like one of the core structures for information. So very important topic, but databases, kind of have a lot of different issues, right? Because if you put information into a database, the database is really only as good as the information you put in. Now tell me if you guys have ever experienced this. Have you ever gone somewhere, and let's say a doctor's office, maybe as an example, or, I don't know, you went somewhere to get your car fixed and they type your stuff into a database, right? But they mistype your name. So, like, that happens to me all the time. In fact, I'll give you a little tip. Sometimes I give them the wrong information on purpose, right? Like I misspell my last name or give them the wrong address because I really don't want to be in the database. You know what I mean? And that way, if I get a piece of mail and it's like George, instead of Ty, oh, I know where that came from. I know how I got on that list. Yeah, it's kind of dastardly. But have you ever gone to like a doctor's office or something and they just like misspell your name? And then you go back to get something, and it's like, no, this is my name. Well, we don't have you. But I was here. So you have this like issue of like data quality too, right? So where was the problem there? Yeah, it's human error, whoever entered the data into the machine. That's why a lot of places now, and have you guys ever gone to like a restaurant now where you can order, heck, McDonald's is doing it. I don't know if you guys have done that at McDonald's. It's like I don't have to walk up and talk to that lady who doesn't understand it. I want no pickles on my burger. Right. I can just do it myself. Yeah. Right? I don't even have to stand in line. I just pay with my credit card and I'm all done. Or there's plenty of restaurants now that are also... Yeah, Applebee's, very good. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. But at the same time, there's information capture. Did you guys ever look at your driver's license these days? Right? In the old days, you'd get pulled over. Not like I have experience, but I'm just saying. Yeah, we have barcodes on the back of these. So when the cop goes back to the car, he's not like writing this down. Why? Because he can screw it up. So somebody got smart and said, "I'm gonna just put a barcode on there and have a barcode reader written." I mean, there's computers already there, so they just have a little scanner in there. And you go, beep, it all comes up. All right, get this guy a ticket. Or like in my case, he's an old white guy. Let him go.
So it takes 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's because they're trying to figure out if they should haul you off to the Huskow. You even know what a Huskow is? I hope you never do.
They do that for retail too. You don't have a receipt in certain places, like
Right.
where I work, you gotta have a driver's license in order to return something that's longer than 30 days without a receipt. And it keeps a database of like how many times you've returned something, and that's kind of what piques their interest if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or if you like, and see, I just happen to see this in my wallet, right? I got a Costco card, right? Shop there once in a while. If I shop at Costco and I lose a receipt, I just show them my membership card. They can look it up. I don't need a receipt. So all that stuff gets stored. So it's kind of interesting about that. Of course, we've talked a little bit about security, integrity, all that kind of stuff. All right, let's talk a little bit about this. Right? Remember, we've already talked about bits and bytes.
Yep.
But that is really kind of the foundation. And notice how we start with bits, right? One single digit of binary information. Get 8 of them, you have a byte. Remember, a byte is enough to form a single character. Character then can be used, a collection of them, to build a field. So one little spot in here is a field. The whole row is called a record. The whole collection in the table is called a file or a table. And then when you start to connect them once again, you have the database. Now, if you get into like studying this stuff formally, I think it's a pretty fascinating field, and like I said, it's highly employable. But no matter if you go into web or software or networking or CSS, folks, you will be contending with databases one way or another. If you're a computer support specialist, you'll have a ticket logging system.
Oh, really?
Right, oh, absolutely. You do it all in software. When I first started doing tech support, I wrote my own database ticketing system
Oh, really?
because the school was too cheap to buy one. And plus, I was only one IT guy.
Oh.
But then when I started to get like student workers, then we hired more people, then it became really important because I would have to do reports every month on all the support calls I would have to do. What's that?
Put it on Raspberry?
Can I put it on Raspberry Pi? Absolutely, why not? It's a computer.
I carry my work home with me.
Well, I have a laptop, I don't know why I do that, but
That's funny.
those are the structures that we're dealing with. What's kind of interesting terminology-wise, and this is probably some of the stuff that would have been on the Kahoot, and I'm not really here to kind of rule you on like becoming database experts, not at all. But when you start to work with a piece of software that runs a database, that's called a database management system. So for example, have you guys ever used Microsoft Access? Some of you have, right? That's like one of our classic like consumer-based database systems. If you guys are in the web program or the software program, you'll work with various different database management systems, and you get to the point where you start to write your own, right? So you write your own software that can interface with the data directly. Notice some of the words in here. I mean, things that you'll probably hear about if you study these things. That talked about entities and relationships. An instance, that's a real big thing in programming, right? When you create an instance of something. And then you look at these other things. But it gets really more interesting when you get to these, because when you start to look at what we call primary keys, now we start to look at information as being unique. So for example, I'm pretty fortunate, or unfortunate, depending on your perspective. As a kid, I thought I was unfortunate because I had a really weird name, right? Nobody in my school had my name, first name or last, right? So, of course, you become the butt of jokes and people poke fun at you, right? Why don't you have like a normal name, like John or Mark or something, you know, like somebody from the Bible, right? But I didn't have that fortune. But now as an adult, I feel fortunate because I got a name like nobody else, and people remember who I am because of it, right? But when you go into a database like this, now we have this thing where it's possible, well, I know for sure there's going to be a whole bunch of guys with the names James or Jim or Jimmy or whatever, and maybe even the last name too. Do you guys ever wonder why like your student email accounts are like, you know, Smith J3? Because there's probably like 24 other J Smiths on campus, that's why. And it happens all the time that you get people same last names, same first names. So how do we make them unique? If you're James McCracken and you're James McCracken, then what? What separates you guys? Well, he's taller.
I put an asterisk in my paper.
You use the at sign for your A? Or? But what would differentiate you guys at that point?
Nothing really.
There-
Social number?
What's
There
that?
were two girls in my band in middle school. They both played clarinet and they both had the same name. I don't remember the name.
But that's not unusual. My daughter, right? She was in the classroom, and apparently, like people name their kids in like cycles, right? Because we named her Zoe. Well, in Greek, so we figured, you know, that's a Greek name, right? In her class, she had 3 other girls named Zoe.
Oh.
Spelled the same way too, Z-O-E.
Well, you spell it wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so they have their last name, so you know everybody would go around going like Zoe H or Zoe K or Zoe A, or they just call them by their last name instead. But in a database, how do I make a distinction so that like if I give you an A and he deserves an F, just for examples, how do I make sure you guys get the right grade?
ID code.
Yeah, well, you each have a unique ID, right? You each have a unique date of birth. You probably have a unique address, right? But you can see a lot of information could still be similar or the same.
Right.
But in a database, we usually have this practice of giving everything in a database an ID. And then that ID often becomes the primary key. So the primary key makes it a unique identifier. Nobody else in that database can have that same number. As far as the US government is concerned, a real important primary key for most of its citizens is what?
Social Security.
Yeah, the social security number. Now, here's an interesting tidbit too, folks. When I was a kid, I didn't get a social security number. You know when I got a social security number? When I wanted to go to school, right, to college, right, and apply for student loans. And to get student loans, what else do you have to do? You have to sign up for the draft, right?
Yeah.
You have to register, you know, and you can't do that unless you have a social security number. And see, up until that point, I worked under the table cash, so it was never an issue, part of the black market economy. Now kids are born, and this happened to my kids, the moment they're born,
Social Security.
they're doing social security number. That's pretty wild. Here, really interesting tidbit. I was talking with one of my old friends this weekend. We spent a couple hours on the phone together, because I don't talk to him very often. Talk about all sorts of stuff. But he was talking about how he's done this thing recently, and I would encourage you guys, if you ever have a little extra money, is to do one of these like DNA tests and ancestry things. Pass. All right. Yeah, suspicious.
Yeah,
FBI.
Yeah.
Getting sold already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
They're working, right now they're working with the FBI now, with all that information out.
Oh, man, do you think they weren't before? I'm not worried because I'm not up to, well, I'm usually up to no. Well, whatever, I won't even say that. But the interesting thing is we started talking about that ancestry information, right? So like you give them your DNA and you run all these tests and they verify all this stuff. So one interesting story that he told me is his buddy convinced him to do it. And his buddy has two brothers. They did their DNA test and they found out that they weren't brothers. It's like, well, they weren't full brothers, they were half brothers. It's like, actually it was daddy had some explaining to do. But they never knew that. Can you imagine like going through your whole life calling somebody your brother thinking that they're 100% blood and they're not? Isn't that weird?
That's good.
Even stranger, right? So I know, at least my parents would always tell me, you're 100% Greek going back till all of eternity. And you know what? I did the DNA test, and that's exactly what it showed. Like, some ridiculously high percentage, like 93 or 95% certain that you're like from this tiny little part of the planet, right? Because people never leave the village because they couldn't, whatever. Because all they had was a donkey to get around. And sure enough, that's where my ancestors are from. Right. My wife, though, who thought she was like mostly German and mostly Armenian, like because she knew both sides of her family, turned out she had like Norwegian and Jewish and African and English and Asian. I'm like, where did that stuff come from? Somebody's been sleeping around, you know? Right?
Travelers.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, people, they move around and people intermingle. And, so then my kids have like that weird mishmash of like half Greek and all this other stuff.
Well, that's a good thing though. That's good because I'm not trying to say anything bad. Down with the pure bloods, you guys are going down. That's insane.
No, you know what? It's healthier. Mutts are healthier than purebreds. It's just how it is. Right? You're better off intermingling. And the truth is, like my son's joke is everybody's like 164th Cherokee or something, right? Maybe. All right. I'm not sure how this goes to this, but I know we're real close to done here, folks. Just a few more slides. That's Microsoft Access if you ever get a chance to play with it, but you can see information in the table. Right. All right. What we are now moving into, though, is this era of what we call big data. And we really have kind of been into this category now, probably for the last 5 years in earnest. So much information is now being collected, information that we used to never collect. Everywhere we have devices, and I even talked about like how this is collecting data all the time. This feeds back wirelessly to a database in somebody's office where they store all the temperature information. And if I say it's cold in this room, the guy can go in there and look and see a report and go, no, it's not. It says right here, it's been 75 degrees in there the whole time. What are you talking about? Right? How are you going to fight that? Right? But that information all gets stored, and now we have this problem where if we need to take all that raw information that's stored and analyze it and turn it into useful information, well, that takes a whole different skill level, and that's why we're building this new degree as well. Because now we're dealing with big data. You have to take like huge volumes of data and analyze it, sometimes on the fly, to make decisions. Does it ever blow your mind that you can go to Google, bring up Google Maps, click on the traffic, and it tells you where all the slowdowns are?
Yep.
How does that happen? You got like guys out there with like iPads, like, slow here. No, I'm serious. How does that happen? Partially through your phone. You have people that actually will get on their phone and say, oh, there's an accident on the road here. Oh, another accident.
Well, they can actually analyzes the speed between 2 points, and that's how they know.
That's part of it. That is, because they do location tracking and they can tell that you're traveling.
Mm-hmm.
When I leave here at night, if I bring up Google Maps, it'll tell me what the ETA is to home and which route I should take, and I usually don't listen to it, but sometimes I want to make a stop along the way or whatever. But there's other things that happen too. If you guys ever get to an intersection, and usually every major intersection, if you look real carefully, there's cameras everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And if there's not cameras, there's sensors as well. There's so much data being tracked. Like you watch like those like TV shows where they have like crime shows and like the FBI or Homeland Security is like, oh, tap into the live camera feed. That's totally for real, folks. In fact, you can even do that in some capacity. Yeah, a lot of it is public. Yeah. But they're capturing that data and storing all of it. They're storing the video, they're storing the data feeds, and then they need to analyze it. So we get into this era of big data, and what do we do with all the data that we're collecting? Really interesting tidbit. You guys, Nathan was here last week talking with you, right, which was really cool of him to do. The people that work at Foxconn, one of the reasons they need these data scientists and specialists is when they get up to full production capacity here, despite whatever the news tells you about them, right? When they get up to full production capacity, they're expecting to be generating from the manufacturing floor 30 terabytes of data per 8-hour shift.
Wow.
We're talking almost 100 terabytes of data in a 24/7 operation. Multiply that out. That's like insane. That's a lot of flash drives.
That's a lot of money.
Right. Now here's the interesting thing with that. They take all that data, as it happens on the production floor, analyze it on the fly and visualize it, and then they have these huge rooms in their plant, TVs, floors and ceiling, wall to wall, that show like production goals, how many machines are going through, who's doing what machines, about to blink out. It's all this real-time data at the same time. So we have these like issues now, like how do we deal with all that? And if you guys are looking for careers, really sincerely, they're going to need all sorts of people that can tap into this stuff. What feeds the data up onto those screens? It starts with devices like Raspberry Pis, tiny little microprocessor computers that are built into the manufacturing equipment, that are networked wirelessly or wired. Machines talk to each other. They send the data back to the servers store it. Other pieces of software read that data on the fly in some cases and create all these interactive screens. So even though we might be putting robots on the manufacturing floor to do all the production, right, where humans barely even touch the product, the truth is we still need humans to like run all that infrastructure, and then what happens if the cable gets knocked out, right? For silly as that is, like I was in T311 and I couldn't get the monitor to work, and I'm kind of a smart guy. I was like, I know what to plug in and try. And I had to call tech, and it turned out, hey, you know, the Ethernet cable, someone kicked out the Ethernet cable on the floor that sends a signal from the monitor, you know. So, still need human beings to intercede. So don't let all this big data stuff like scare you from like a positive future, for sure. Yeah. Big data. Now, when you really get huge with data, then you start to take like server racks like the ones that you see, and you fill them full of storage, and then you fill huge buildings full of them, and what happens to that data? We're just building it up, building it up, and building it up. I'm really curious to see what happens in the future. I mean, the trend of like super small, high capacity storage, I mean, we're already there. What's the future going to look like? If we're generating that much data now, what's going to happen in the future? What are we going to be keeping data points on? And the answer is everything. And what are we going to use it for? Everything. Everything. And it'll take a while. It really will. They have all these initiatives. They want to do like the new Green Deal. I don't know if you guys like read up on any of that. Okay, if you didn't, you should probably Google it, because it could impact your lives. But they're really making a lot of decisions, like the whole debate of like climate change, for example. Some people say there's data that totally supports it, and some people contest it. Say the data's not valid. The truth is you can take any information and interpret it a different way. That's the problem. And who's to say one person's interpretation is right or wrong? Think about, for example, if you were in an environment and you saw somebody discussing something with somebody else and get into an altercation, and maybe you guys have maybe been in these situations, and then you stop in the aftermath and you start to talk to the people that were involved about what they witnessed. Did you ever see like any of those, like, you know, there's lots of great documentaries and TV shows about this kind of stuff too. But the way that people describe the same exact thing that they saw is completely different. So really part of the movement of all this stuff and warehousing all this information is, how do you contest information that's stored like this? I mean, this computer says you didn't pay your parking ticket. But I did. No. The computer says you didn't. But that's a scenario that happened in my life, actually.
Get a receipt.
Right? Well, I paid by check. So what's your receipt? Canceled check. Right? And that's how she proved it. She had to like go into a courtroom and say, look, it's your stamp on here. It says that you deposited my check. And I didn't even know the ticket number on the check. But on their system, it said she never paid, and she lost her license over it. And then ended up getting other tickets because she lost her license and was driving and didn't even know it. So we had like a whole thing, right? But who's to contest the information? One of my issues is when the information is digitized, it's hard to argue. So this is the world we live in. That altercation, if it happens between friends and everybody's witnessing it, and in the aftermath we all told a different story about what we witnessed, all because of our own bias, now what happens? Everybody's got the phone out, video's rolling,
Right.
audio's captured. I didn't say that. Yeah, you did. And look at your face when you said it too, you know. How do you fight that? And then we know our apps are listening to us, right? We talked about how Facebook is like, yes, Facebook, I'd like a QP's hamburger for lunch. So we'll see if that comes up on my screen. I want you to think about that, because we live in this era now where we're not going to be able to fight a perceived digital reality that's being created. So we drive through an intersection, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen any of these. They have them in Chicago. They had a few in Milwaukee, where they have traffic cams, and if like you blow through a red light, snaps a pic, grabs your license plate. Or if you guys ever gone through the tolls,
Yep.
you forgot your iPass or whatever, or don't have one, right? All of a sudden you get a letter in the mail. How do you fight that? So here's a picture of you driving through. Well, how do I know it's from that day? I mean, how are you going to go into their database and disprove it? Think about it.
Florida, outlawed all their traffic cams. So they still have them up, they operate, and you will not be issued a ticket.
It's kind of like how I think in New York, where I used to live, the police have to be visible. If they are hitting and pull you over, they can let you go,
Yeah.
because there's no proof. They have to be visible, and there's like this whole set of rules. that-
Right. So what they've done in Chicago is they have the cameras and they have blue lights on them, and it says police right there, and they have a sign that says, this intersection is being monitored, you will get a ticket if you blow the
That's
light.
probably how they keep them up then.
Yep.
In Tampa, it was just a little camera, all you would see is the flash, there's no, this
Yeah.
is being videotaped, nothing, so, yeah, they threw them all out, all the cases and no more future tickets at all.
Brilliant.
But you'll still see the flash, so they're still taking your picture, someone's still getting it.
Yeah. If you're driving through the intersection, fingers buried deep in your nose, you know,
That was like,
or singing at the top of your lungs, you know, that kind of thing.
if anybody ever watched like Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson puts the mask up.
Yeah, I had a friend that used to like blow through carpool lanes in California, and he would carry a mannequin in the car, put it in the passenger seat so he could fly down the carpool. Yeah. And he wasn't the only one either.
That's a good idea.
All right, folks.
Welcome to IT business and how to break the laws.
Right.
Yeah, that's not what I'm trying to push here. I really, what I want to do is I want to get your minds thinking about this stuff and seeing possibilities and what the future holds, hopefully. That is it for today. I will be posting the assignments in a little bit, pretty much following the typical pattern. I do want to make you guys aware that I think our midterm date is not next week, but maybe the week following. I'll keep you informed. So that means a midterm exam will be coming up, similar to the quiz, just a little longer. And in terms of the readings, we're just going chapter by chapter right now through the book. So if you haven't read chapter 5, make sure that you do the homework. And my pledge to you is I hope to get caught up on grading this week, and I know I've been pretty far behind. Because you know why? Because I've been building this data analytics program. That's all I've been doing all weekend. It was paperwork, believe it or not. And all day yesterday, too. But if you guys are interested in that degree, it starts in the fall. So,
I noticed you called it a reverse job fair.
yeah, I'm glad somebody asked. Oh, well, you know, I did post that information about it, but basically, if you guys have ever gone to a traditional job fair, usually it'll be like all the people that want to hire you, and they'll have a table, right, and then you walk up and you talk to them. This is the other way around. So you set up like a trifold or maybe a laptop showing your work, have some resumes, maybe some cards or something, you dress up nice, and then the employers walk around and talk to you.
That's cool.
So if you guys are interested in doing that very sincerely, this is not an obligation. Well, first of all, there's an extra credit point you can earn by showing up. In fact, I'll give you an extra credit point even if you don't do the job fair, because I think the IT advisory board meeting is that valuable.
I was about to say, isn't that also the IT advisory?
And you know, I'll tell you one thing that I see is, you know, the two students that kind of stopped in, like Jason stopped in that one day kind of by happenstance, and then Nathan I actually invited here. Those are two guys that made a point of coming to the advisory board meetings a couple of times. And it never surprises me that the students that decide to come to that are people that get hired. Because they come to these things and they meet people that are working in industry here in our area. And a lot of them are like pretty high up on the food chain at like Uline and Amazon and all these companies. And then they realize, wow, they're just kind of normal people like me. They just have more gray hair and experience. And they're just normal people. And the nice thing is you hear these people talk about what they're doing, what skills they're looking for, what software they're using, what hardware they're employing, and you and sometimes make silly little connections that lead to a career. I mean, that's kind of how I ended up here at Gateway. I was working somewhere else with our dean, come to an interview, there he is. It's like, hey, you know, and all of a sudden you're hired. It's just, it's people connections that really kind of drive careers, folks, so don't discount that. So if you guys are interested in doing that reverse job fair, send me an email, read through the email description, and if you're very intent on it, we can set up a time outside of class where I can help coach you on your resume and your materials gladly. So I don't know if any of you are at the point where you're looking for work, you know, close to finishing your tech diploma or degree. Probably not, because this is an intro level course, right? But companies also look for interns, you know, with active students, so that's another possibility. So just drop me an email, I'll help guide you through the process. We provide the trifolds. If you guys want a trifold, we give them to you for free. You don't have to buy one. Because it can be like $10 to buy one. So. All right, you're free to go. Thank you. See you next week.